Hello everyone, this is a video response to Jack Loop's comment saying that he'd like to see me land my modular science mission on the moon, and I'm always happy to oblige. Thinking about it, I'm realizing that this is actually going to demonstrate several skills that some people are having trouble with, namely getting into orbit, getting to the moon, landing on the moon, and doing an orbital rendezvous. I'll be doing all of those things in this video, and I'll be talking my way through them. So you'll get an opportunity to see how it's done. And if you have any questions about how it was done, well, feel free to leave a comment about them. Without further ado, let's take a look at the spacecraft itself. And here we go. So you can see the lifter stage right here. And keep in mind this is done in career mode. And this is the parts that I had unlocked at that point in time. I think I'm past there now. I think I've got pretty much everything unlocked. Anyway, the lifter stage is equipped with Skipper rockets, and it's equipped with the half-size Rockamax fuel tanks. It's standard asparagus staging, and then at the upper part of it, it docks to the lander. The lander is equipped with RCS. It's got lights. It's got landing legs, and not a whole lot of science, as you'll notice, and that's because the top module here is the actual science module. And I'm sure there's a more efficient way to do this. I got to thinking about it after I'd already done the mission, and I realized I could have just put them, since I need 7 for Minmus or 15 for the moon, I could have just put them in a circular arrangement where I could have used symmetry to mount them around a central piece. But I didn't do that at the time, so this is what we're stuck with. Anyway, it works very well. You'll notice that with each of these science modules, they're equipped with all of the science equipment that's available, and that's because at the point when I built this, I revised it as I got the new science gadgets, so that I could land on a planet and knock out all of the biome-specific science and be done with it. So this also has this module has a probe core, because when this is in orbit around the moon, the lander picks off one of these modules and descends with it, performs all the science, and then it comes back up and it rendezvous with this service module in orbit. And it pulls off another module and descends to another biome, and so on and so forth. But with this probe core, that way if the lander were to run out of fuel or something like that, this module could still find its way to the lander and make an orbital rendezvous, so the mission wouldn't be a total loss. So I think that pretty much covers everything construction-wise. Let's go ahead and launch it. So here we are on the launch pad. Looks like Jebediah is all strapped in and ready to go. He's already enjoying the ride. We'll enable SAS, throttle all the way up, and for science. As I said, this is standard asparagus staging. There's a lot of fuel hoses, a lot of struts, so this craft is going to roll a little bit on its way to orbit. It's not that big of a deal. As we drop stages, it becomes more stable. But you can see it's rock solid. It's still pointing straight up, and that's the important. We just need to be pointing in the right direction. I'm going to go ahead and go out to map view, get the nav ball up, get the camera pointed where we need it to be pointed. Now we'll drop a couple of stages before we start our gravity turn at 10,000 meters. One of the stages that we drop is going to be right before 10,000 meters, and that kind of works out because if you're not paying attention to your altitude, you know that right after you stage, it's time to start your gravity turn. So, as I said, I'm going to talk my way through every step of this. I don't want anybody to feel like their intelligence is being insulted. I know there's plenty of people who watch this who have been to the moon, who've done orbital rendezvous, who've done all of that. There's a lot of you who have been to other planets. That's something I've never done. So don't feel like I'm talking down to you. I'm just trying to help the people who are having trouble with this stuff. And there goes the first stage. As you can see, it looks a little bit lopsided right now. But since, again, we're not changing our velocity at all except for accelerating, it's not that big of a deal. All we need to do is wait to drop the next stage, which is going to occur at about 9,500 meters or so. Fuel starting to run out right now. And there it goes. We'll start our gravity turn. It would be more efficient to just chase that prograde vector all the way down to a 45-degree angle, but this lifter stage actually has plenty of fuel. By the time we get to orbit, by the time we get circularized, we're still going to have these 3 tanks in the middle operational, and those 2 outer ones will actually come with us to the moon, and then we'll crash them into the lunar surface. After we drop this stage, we'll head out to the map view and we'll watch our apoapsis climb. There it goes. Now you can see here we're not picking up a whole lot of speed. What we're going to do is once we get to that apoapsis that we want, we're going to point it down at the horizon and keep accelerating angular so that we can reach our orbital velocity. Because basically the way this craft works, I have flown it quite a few times. If you don't start accelerating as soon as you reach that apoapsis or slightly before it, you're going to end up with a lopsided orbit, and I try not to do that. I take pride in circular orbits. I'm going to go ahead and straighten out this roll just a little bit. And again, that's just a little bit of housekeeping. It doesn't matter a whole lot, especially at this altitude, because there's not a whole lot of air in your way. Apoapsis is still climbing. We are picking up quite a bit of speed, but as I said, when we reach that desired apoapsis, we're still going to have a lot of delta V that needs to be put out there. So I'm just going to lay it down on its side and keep accelerating. I'll go ahead and do that now. These are the 3 tanks, as I said, that we will be taking with us to the moon. Those 2 outer ones will keep us going until we circularize, and we'll also use them to accelerate for our intercept with the moon. As you can see, I've got it laid down on its side. Our apoapsis is at about 81 kilometers and climbing right now. We're out to about 1 minute and 45 seconds, so I'm going to shut the engines down and put in a maneuver node to circularize. Now, the way I usually do this, I just kind of watch for the apoapsis and periapsis to both hit the sides of the orbit, about like that, and then you know they're fairly close. They're 85 by 82, and we'll take that for now. So we're going to go ahead and point down at our vector. And because this is such a large craft, it doesn't handle very well. It's equipped with quite a bit of SAS, but you got to think about the fact that you're trying to move tons and tons of spacecraft. All right, our burn estimate is 55 seconds, and that's going to occur. Our node's going to occur in 1 minute, so we want to start our burn at about 28 seconds. If you do half your burn before the node and half after, you're going to get a much more accurate outcome. So we'll go ahead and time warp down to about 30 seconds and accelerate. We're at 1470 right now, so we've got about 900 meters per second of delta V to go. I believe orbital velocity is about 2,265 meters per second. We'll just try to keep the nose centered on that burn vector. Now, a lot of times when you're doing a maneuver, you're going to notice that that burn vector starts going off to the sides. You want to try to follow it as closely as possible. What you're looking at there is that you're not quite centered on where you're headed. If you try to keep that burn vector in the middle, you're going to end up with a much more accurate burn, and that especially becomes important when you're going to other planets. As I said, I haven't had a whole lot of experience landing on other planets, but I have done quite a few rendezvous with them. And there's our circularization burn complete. We're going to be in an 87 by 83 orbit, and we're not even going to be there for an entire orbit, because as you can see, the moon is right there. We're just about to the point where we're going to want to start our transfer burn. So I'm going to put a maneuver node down here and see what we come up with. You want to get it to about 850 meters per second of burn to reach the moon. So we'll see what happens here. Now, when you're trying to reach the moon, basically you want to start burning at a point in your orbit which is about a quarter of the way around from where the moon is. As you can see, the moon is right there. So we're going to try to go about 90 degrees ahead of that and get it out to about 850. And as you can see, right there we come up with an encounter. So I'm going to keep lowering the delta V, and we're going to try to get an apoapsis that's fairly close to the moon, although I'm going to be changing it. Okay, well, that's going to be a direct intercept. I'm going to be changing it as soon as we get into the moon's sphere of influence. Our burn is going to be 42 seconds, and the node is in 43 seconds. We'll start our burn at about 21 seconds. So now I've just got to get the nose pointed in the right direction. And then once we reach that moon encounter, you're going to see I'm going to do a burn to put this in a polar orbit. So about 8 seconds left before we start our burn. And here we go. Now we will run out of fuel on those two external tanks before we complete this burn. And honestly, I don't care. Just in the interest of not having a bunch of extra space junk, I usually just take them to the moon with me and deorbit them onto the surface. Since we're on an intercept trajectory, and we're actually on a collision course right now, that's going to work out just fine. Because we can drop them right before we circularize our orbit around the moon, and they'll be out of our way. As you can see, our apoapsis is gradually increasing. Try to keep that vector centered. This is where accuracy does become important. As you can see, the vector's starting to drift a little bit. So we're going to chase it. And we're just about exactly where we were trying to be. Get rid of this node. And then we're going to time warp a little bit. As I said, I'm going to stop this right when we get to the moon's sphere of influence. That way I can adjust it and get us into a polar orbit. You can see our velocity is gradually decreasing as Kerbin's gravity is trying to pull us back. And once we get into the moon's sphere of influence, it's going to start increasing because we'll be falling toward the moon instead of toward Kerbin. Alright, so we've got about 15 seconds left before our encounter, and there it is. And now it's gonna be a little bit buggy. Okay, so we're just about to the point where if we wanted an equatorial orbit, we'd be in great shape, but that's not what we want. So with a polar orbit, with a modular mission like this, you're going to end up crossing every point on the moon at one point or another, which is the whole point here. So we're going to get it lined up over the pole. Alright, so this is going to give us a periapsis. We want about 25,000 meters. And that's just about perfect. We'll go ahead and burn on that. The sooner you make your adjustments, the further out you make your adjustments, the less delta V they require. And we can see our nodes coming up in 16 seconds. We've got a 3-second burn, so things are working out just about the way we want them to. 3-second burn isn't going to use a whole lot of fuel. If you tried to do that closer to the moon, you would end up using a lot of fuel. Because of course you're going to accelerate up to about 900 meters per second by the time you hit the lunar surface. And you can see I'm going to miss my node by just a little bit. It doesn't really matter as long as we burn accurately. Like I said, this thing turns like a scow, so you just have to deal with it the best you can. And I think we just lost our external tanks, because I noticed our delta V started dropping, or our delta V started dropping a lot slower than it was. So we're carrying a bunch of that extra weight. So what we're going to do right now, since we're still on a collision course, we're going to go ahead and drop those, and they'll crash into the lunar surface. That'll also aid us in being able to turn a little bit better. And there we go. So our periapsis is now just below 25,000 meters. So we're going to raise it just a little bit, get it above 25,000. And when we get to that point, we'll circularize. As you can see, I've left plenty of flags on the lunar surface. We'll try not to hit any. And we're going to end up being about an hour and a half out from our next node. Circularize at about 25,000 meters. And it's not going to be a perfect 25,000 meters because, of course, both your apoapsis and periapsis are going to change. But we'll get it as close as we can. There's 25 by 25. Now we need to get pointed in the right direction. And it rolls a little bit easier now with all those fuel tanks gone. As I said, this spacecraft has way more fuel than it needs, and that's good, because if you think about the fact that you're doing 7 descents and ascents to and from the lunar surface, you're going to need that fuel for the lander. Okay, so now we pretty much just have to wait on our maneuver node, which is going to be in about an hour and a half. We'll get pointed at our vector, just so we're there when the node comes. This craft still turns pretty slow, but the good thing is once you get it into orbit, you're not going to have to turn it a whole lot. Now, I know I've been talking a lot about polar orbit since we made our moon intercept, and there is a reason for that. If you're not aware of it, basically, when you're trying to knock out all of the science on the moon in one trip like this, you're going to want to be in a polar orbit. If you're in an equatorial orbit, you're going to cover every spot around the equator of the moon about every 20 minutes or so. I can't remember exactly what the orbital period around the moon is. But if you're in a polar orbit, the moon is constantly rotating beneath you, so you're getting free translation from east to west or west to east, depending on the planet you're around. Some of them have a retrograde spin. But the polar orbit, in essence, is going to give you that free translation, so you can cover every square inch of ground on the moon if you're willing to wait long enough. We're lined up on our vector, so I'm going to go ahead and time warp and get us a little bit closer to that maneuver node. And as you notice, the nav ball just flipped, and that's because we went over the pole. So now instead of heading north, we're heading south. Get it lined up again. It does tend to drift a little bit. And again, since our burn is 27 seconds, we're going to want to try to do half of that before the node and half of it afterward. So we're going to start our burn at about 14 seconds. Make sure we're lined up and wait for our burn to start. And there we go. And there we go. We're circularized around the moon. Our apoapsis is 25. We're going to need to adjust the periapsis just a little bit, and that's going to be coming up. We'll just point at our prograde vector and burn on it so that we can get into a 25 by 25 orbit. I'll do that off camera, and I'll end this video here. The next video I do will be about landing on the moon, returning to the service module, docking and undocking. So there's going to be some good stuff in there for people who are having trouble with that. Anyway, this is covered launching and getting to the moon, and I'll see you in the next video.